down one on the right.
How you been?
Hey, doing fabulous.
Good. Unfortunately, we got a solution for letting people in down there, right?
Yes. Okay, we got that all set. So yeah, we're in a good spot.
I was talking to him, but he got it.
So I appreciate you doing that. That
Yeah,
just
no.
gives me peace of mind.
And us as well, because now we know there's some security there for you guys, for sure.
Yeah.
So,
But feels really secure. That's been right here on the property. So
yeah.
we'll be all right.
Good. Inspector Jones? How you doing?
You didn't think you were going to get out of this, did you?
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. I think we're right about at the 12:30 hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We're really excited today to be able to share some news with the media that may help us with some identification. Oh, you guys are all set up for me here. Okay, sorry about that.
Thank you.
With some identification, on March 31st of 2020, we were responded to an area, a rural area of Stark County off of Sandy Drive, southeast, where somebody had discovered skeletal remains of a body. Through that investigation, we employed the assistance of our Stark County Coroner's Office, as well as BCI and I, to make an attempt to identify the body. And so today is a culmination of that work, of folks working together to try to make an identification. While we haven't made a positive identification yet, we're hopeful that we're going to be able to make that identification with help from you and from our public here in Stark County. Somebody might come forward and recognize or know something about this case. With us today, we have the Attorney General's Director of BCI and I, Mr. Morbitzer, and I know he has a guest with him, and also Coroner Rusnak with us. And let me tell you that folks have worked diligently on this case since March 20th, or March 11th, 2020, to try to identify the skeletal remains here. And so it's always frustrating for us in law enforcement when we get a case that we run into dead ends and we cannot find the results that we hope that we can find and we're looking for. And so to have partners like BCI and I and the Ohio BCI Crime Lab, as well as our coroner's office, to working together, it certainly is a testament to how we work collaboratively at the state and local level to solve cases. So with that, Mr. Morbitzer, or I'm not sure if you're going to.
I go next.
Can you please say and spell your name for you, please, sir?
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Ronald Rusnak, R-U-S-N-A-K. Thank you again for being here today. Thank you, Sheriff. And like the Sheriff said, this is a great, I think, collaboration between all the agencies. Was really excited to produce the artwork and work with BCI. So, really, you, the community, we really want to hear from you if you have any way to help us identify John Doe. John Doe has had a significant injury throughout their life. We have evidence of other fractures that he had sustained. So if you can get us information, we could then search for medical records and try to match up some x-rays. That also can help us identify him. Not only injuries previous to his life, earlier in his life, but also around the time of his death, there were also injuries as well. So, if you have any information, please reach out to us. That will hopefully help us give closure both to him, his family, as well as bring justice if there was an injustice here. So again, thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to Attorney General.
Good afternoon, Superintendent Joe Morbitzer, M-O-R-B as in Boston, I-T-Z-E-R. And first of all, on behalf of Attorney General Yost, we'd like to thank the Sheriff and the Coroner for this partnership. This is very high on the list of priorities for the Attorney General, identifying the remains of people who we've been able to identify in the past. We have established a separate unit for that works with our cold case unit and our missing persons unit. And we've been very successful with that. And as the Attorney General has said many times, he just wants to make sure we reunite those people with their families so they can provide a proper burial and give them the respect that they deserve. We have Samantha Molnar with us. She's one of our criminal analysts, and she's also a forensic reconstructionist, as you've seen. She's been very successful in what she does so far, and has had several reconstructions that we have been able to identify, and as I said, give them the proper burial that they deserve. I can't stress enough what the sheriff said about cooperation with different agencies and offices. This is one of the strengths of Ohio law enforcement and the public safety community in general, that we're able to work with sheriff's offices, local police, federal and coroner's offices in order to solve crimes, or in this case, hopefully identify this individual. With that being said, I'll turn it over to our expert on reconstruction. And Sam, if you would, please.
Hi, I'm Samantha Molnar, M-O-L-N as in Nancy A-R. I've been with BCI about 7 years, reconstructing for about 6. As Joe has stated, some of them have been identified, some through press releases like this, and others through genetic genealogy. I guess the big thing that I want to just state is that if you have a missing loved one that doesn't have DNA on file or you're not sure, is just to reach out to our office or to reach out to the coroner's office, the sheriff's office, and we can all kind of communicate and then hopefully get this person identified. We try to go through the missing persons reports, but a lot of times the faces that I'm reconstructing actually are never reported missing. So if you haven't reported your loved one missing or you don't know if they have DNA on file, I just would recommend coming forward. So that's really all I have. Thanks.
Any questions?
Samantha, would you be able to come back up and just sort of walk us through kind of a descriptor of
Sure.
what we're looking at here, the actual skull on the right, the reconstruction, and what you think he looked like, and after that, how did you do it?
Yeah, so every skull I get's a little different. So this one, the first thing I have to have done is, the coroner's office tells me everything that they have. I read the coroner's report, what was recovered, how decomposed was this person, was their hair found, was their clothing found, what size clothing were they found in. All those things are really important. And then it goes to an anthropologist. The anthropologist will review the whole set of remains that are recovered, and they will try to estimate, age, race, gender, height and weight, and all those things then come to me in a report, and I just kind of take all these clues. Then I actually get the physical skull, which you can see over there on the right-hand side, and I try to look at that skull and see what it tells me. It's basically like a blueprint for your face. So one thing that was very challenging with this doe is that he had absolutely no teeth and that all of his sockets appeared to be healed. So he probably didn't have any teeth in life. So that's one thing that I really tried to put into my sculpture is his lack of teeth. We didn't find a denture, I don't believe. So that's another thing is like sometimes if people maybe don't have teeth but they have a denture found, then I wouldn't exaggerate that as much. But since he didn't have that, my guess is that he likely didn't have teeth in life. He is pretty young to have no teeth, so that was one thing when I was doing this reconstruction that I tried to make sure I didn't make him look too old without having teeth, but also, again, show that feature. So for him also, there wasn't any hair recovered. So that's another thing that's kind of tough is if you have very long hair or very curly hair, that's very distinctive of you. So I guess anybody that's looking at this sculpture, just take into account that that wasn't recovered. So if this isn't the hairstyle of your missing loved one, it still could be your missing loved one. I've definitely had sculptures identified that they had curly hair and they were sculpted with straight hair. So I try to just do something less distracting. Also, we don't know eye color, so I just usually sculpt with brown eyes because it's the most common eye color, but his eyes could have been any color. So don't let that deter you, again, from calling. And then the one on the right is actually from a different case. It's just to show you the process. So once the skull comes to me, I take it to a hospital and we get a CT scan done of it, and then that generates a 3D image that can be printed on a 3D printer. And we partner with Ohio State. I get to work with their students and get them involved in like a real case, and they print this 3D print for me. So then I can operate off the 3D printed skull and keep the original skull for evidence for further DNA analysis, things like that. So underneath all that clay is a 3D printed plastic copy of our John Doe.
Can you take us back to March 31st? It's believed that he has been in this field for 2 years. What were the circumstances surrounding this discovery? Who found him? What time of day was it? Just describe the area.
This is Inspector Jones with our office.
Jones, Bill Jones, Jones. Yeah, the remains were found by a worker who was working in the area, working on oil wells, came across what he believed to be human bones. Our detectives responded to kind of an open field area around an oil well location where the bones were at. So I don't have any details as far as injuries on the bones or injuries that he had. I know there was some fractures on the bones, but there was no landmarks really around the area. It was just a wooded area, really one house in the general location, but just generally a back road where an oil well was located is where he was at.
A couple questions for the coroner. Is it impossible to come up with a cause of death at this point, or the indication that there were previous injuries earlier in life and recent injuries at the time of his death? Does that give you any inclination as to how he may have died?
You know, it's suspicious that he died from traumatic injuries, but I don't know if we'll ever be able to determine that exactly. But yeah, his injuries were significant. He did have a skull fracture that happened sometime around his death. You know, and he also had bilateral shoulder fractures and multiple rib fractures as well. So there was some kind of force, more of a blunt force. Doesn't look like he was hit with an object per se, but a pretty large force distributed throughout his body. So that's all we can really say right now of his injuries that happened sometime around his death. And then there are multiple old rib fractures as well. So he had sustained quite a bit of injury during his lifetime.
So is it being treated as a homicide but not ruled as a homicide? Is that where?
It is undetermined right now. We don't know.
Is there, and when you have remains like that, can you tell if there's any indication of drug use in the victim?
We really can't, because we really can't get any organ samples. So our preference is, to try urine and blood, but obviously in this case, we only had skeletal remains. So we also will try to liver or other organs, but we have no organs at all. It was just his skeleton. So at this point in time,
Were any of the remains buried, or were they just out?
they were found. They were covered. I think just over at least 2 years is what we were able to determine up to this point. It could have been longer, but yeah, I think it was just the kind of wildlife and nature over the 2 years that his body had been laying there.
So buried at some point?
I'm sorry, not buried, but just as the wind and nature takes over, and
And then the 2 years part, how do you determine that it's been about 2 years that it's been there?
so that was also helped to be determined by what is remaining of John Doe. So because there are no organs, there was no tissue, so the amount of time in nature that it takes for that to decompose makes it at least 2 years that he had been laying there.
Have you looked at old mugshots in the system to see if he is familiar or has been in the system before?
I might have to defer that.
Yeah, we've utilized multiple national databases of missing people, and we've ran a couple releases already through the media. We haven't got very, very few calls. Of course, we don't have a lot of information to give before now. With the reconstruction that we have now, we're hopeful that we're going to get some calls in. But we've checked everything that we've had with all databases, state and national databases, and we've been unsuccessful at this point. But with this, hopefully we get some more calls generated.
And I'm sorry. The one thing I can add is, so we do have his DNA, and that's the importance, as Sam had mentioned. So if there's anyone who thinks that this could potentially be their relative, we can look at DNA and try to make a match there.
So all the work that's been done prior to the reconstruction of the John Doe, as far as trying to make a connection with some type of identification with a missing person, that work will begin again. I mean, now that we have a rendering or at least something more to go by, we'll begin that work over and go through those databases as we mentioned and try to see if we can make some comparisons and see if we can come up with something. The other thing that's important to note on the handout, make sure you get one of these. On the second page, there's some information on the clothing that our John Doe was wearing when he was recovered. He was wearing a navy blue, a yellow and white striped t-shirt, black shorts, and athletic shoes. The size is unknown. We have a photograph of the recovered t-shirt and shoes in this release. So those are things of note that somebody might recall, maybe seeing him somewhere within the last couple of years prior to this, or knowing someone that left, a home wearing this type of clothing. So I think it's important to put that into the release as well, that there was some distinctive clothing that he was wearing when he was located.
Can you talk about the importance of closure and potential justice in this case for a family that's out there and a victim?
Well, we've come a long way to get to where we are today. To have this rendering, thanks to our friends and partners at BCI with the coroner's office. And so we're going to take that information that we have and we're going to build upon that to see if we can do some type of identification. But we still have a ways to go. There's a lot of things we don't know. While we know there's some injuries, as was mentioned by our coroner, we don't know what caused those injuries. And so, our work is really still ahead of us with this case. We need help from you. We need help from you to get this out so that we can get some public input on this and see if there's somebody that might recognize our John Doe. And if we get that, we start piecing things together, just as if it was March 31st, 2020 all over again. We basically start the case all over because of this, the new information that's available to us today.
I know it was mentioned that this is like an oil field, like a workers.
There's an oil well on the property. It's not an oil field. There's an oil well on the property where it was
So
located.
pedestrian foot traffic is not normal in this area?
Very rare.
Do you believe this person may have been dropped off there, or?
I don't know that we have that information that we can say for sure right now. That is certainly a possibility. I think there was a lane that went back to the. In most of those rural oil wells, they have a service lane that goes back to them, and I think there was a lane in this case. Really overgrown. I'm not even sure if the well was in service. And so this area was pretty much overgrown, and as the coroner explained, a lot of that overbrush really disguised where the body was.
Samantha, just one quick question for you. Can you talk about, I think in the past when I've interviewed you, you've talked about the closeness that you sort of experience. You sort of try to get involved as much as you can to make that design as real as possible, and you take it personally. Can you talk a little bit about that mindset that you have, and then how many cases have you helped solve? Do you know the numbers?
I don't know if I know an exact number. I think this is my 9th or 10th reconstruction. The really cool thing about my job is I'm a criminal intelligence analyst first. I specialize in missing person cases. I get to work on a whole bunch of different task forces, like he talked about, the cold case unit, human trafficking, everything. So I touch a little bit of everything. But the cool thing is that I do these reconstructions and I get to follow the case. I get to speak to people that call into our office and say, hey, this might be my loved one. And then it's also my job to know everything about that person's life, especially if we do ID them, and then working the homicide case, if it's a homicide case moving forward. And then, like I said, you learn everything about these people. Sometimes you're swabbing their actual family members, and they're coming and looking at your reconstruction and wondering if that's their loved one. So it's like extremely powerful. Also, like I'm literally holding somebody's head in my hands, like as I'm referencing the actual skull to do the reconstruction. So this is somebody's actual life. Their name was taken from them, and we want to do everything we can to try to give them their name back, because nobody deserves to lose their name forever. So that's our goal here, is to not only give them their name back, give their family a funeral, give their family an answer, and then hopefully, you know, put somebody behind bars if it was a homicide.
Lori, did you have a question? I know you, or I thought you did earlier.
Not yet.
Okay. Well, I think, thanks again to our coroner and to our partners with BCI and Samantha for your hard work and your compassion for what you do, because without that, we wouldn't ever solve any of these cases, so we really do appreciate that. And with that, again, I just want to reiterate, we're asking for your help, and we're asking for help from the community to help us identify Stark County's John Doe. And that really does conclude our press conference today. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. I have an uncle Jim Molnar, but no.
I was in the highway patrol. I worked with Jim Moore. It's not that common of a name.
Have you made that mistake before?
I get there.
It usually, so, as I mentioned, I juggle many roles. So I was on a human trafficking task force, you know, I work the Pocation Initiative, I'm a missing persons analyst, I work homicides, work everything. So it usually takes me about a week to 2 weeks in total, like working straight through. So this one took a little longer because of all my other cases. Okay.
Thank you. It's
Yeah.
nice to meet you.
Is it fair to